I'd like to tell you the story of the Social Impact Bond, a multi-stakeholder partnership, a new investment instrument that's created to drive financial and social value. The second story is about a man by the name of Popeye. Popeye is a 59-year-old British man who has spent pretty much his whole life in and out of prison, going on the streets, back in prison. When he was 13, he started drinking, and by 16, he was homeless. His life was a grim cycle. He has a heart problem. He'll end up in the emergency room, get released, panhandle on the streets, get drunk, become violent, get back into prison. And we're just going on and on like that. And then something happened in 2010. His life changed a bit. He was enrolled in a program called One Service. It's a reentry program. So instead of using prison as his housing, the emergency room as his primary care, and really the court system as his support system, he was given a new kind of care. Our case manager connected him to housing, made him go to rehab and counseling. He started taking cooking lessons, and he even opened a bank account. And I'm very pleased to report that since 2010, Popeye has not gone back to prison. Now, the story about Popeye's reentry program is nothing unusual. What's unusual is the funding behind this program. One Service isn't funded by philanthropy, isn't funded by government contracts. It's actually funded by impact investments through the world's first social impact bond, which was created 2 years ago in 2010 by our sister organization in the UK, Social Finance. At its simplest, and I'll go into this in further detail, but at its simplest, the social impact bond raised private investment capital to fund proven programs aimed at prevention. If the providers are successful at achieving certain social outcomes, such as a lower recidivism rate for people like Popeye, the government realizes savings, in this case, expense around the criminal justice system, and the government shares a portion of their savings to the investors by way of returning their principal and a modest rate of return. And so this is how the program works. And if the service providers don't achieve the stated social outcomes, the investors stand to lose their money. The launch of the first social impact bond has generated worldwide interest. If you see on this chart here, it's unbelievable the number of countries pursuing this. And sometimes I even think that the hype is far ahead of the reality. Costly safety net programs are crowding out spending for prevention programs, and taxpayers are increasingly frustrated that the government is funding programs that don't work. We spend as a country at the federal, state, and local level around $60 billion around incarceration. That's up from $10 billion just in 1980. If you think about the other costs associated with incarceration, such as the criminal justice system or victimization, that number is multifold of that $60 billion. At any given time, there's 6 million Americans in correctional facilities. That is 1/4 of the world's population, inmate population, that are locked up in US jails and prisons. In the instance of recidivism, we have now amazing reentry programs that are proven, that work, that deliver better social outcomes for the individuals, and also create the right economic conditions. But philanthropy has spent money to refine these amazing programs, yet philanthropy isn't really sufficient to take it to scale. In fact, I'd like to think that there is a market failure in social sector funding. Even the best nonprofits, and many of you know these nonprofits out there, are starved for growth capital. It's hard for them to access capital that is long-term in nature, that's reliable, that's sustainable, in a scale that is really required to address the problems in society. And then the final factor that is really exciting is the rise of a new class of investors. I think the last couple of decades have been a tremendous amount of history for the impact investing movement. And in particular, over the last 5 years with the great financial crisis, I think these investors are even seeing more reason to put their money to do work and do well at the same time. All these factors, the confluence of tremendous fiscal distress, burgeoning social innovation, yet a market failure in social sector funding, and the rise of this new class of investors have paved the way for the birth of the social impact bond. So how does it work? First of all, the social impact bond is not a bond in the traditional sense, so erase any kind of thinking around a municipal instrument. So this is how it works. First, an intermediary like social finance issues a social impact bond to raise long-term working capital from private investors. The funding is used to scale up services, typically over an established time frame like 5 to 10 years, aimed at prevention. The providers then go out to the community and deliver the services, and the intermediary monitors the ongoing performance and makes sure that course corrections, if they're necessary, are implemented and gauge process against the targeted outcomes. An independent evaluator then comes in to determine whether the social outcomes have been achieved, and if they have been achieved, the government then pays the pre-specified amount of money at the outset of the contract. And if the outcomes were not achieved, the government owes nothing. And then finally, the last piece of the plumbing is that we return the capital to the investors under a successful social impact bond program. At the core, social impact bonds are about monetizing Ben Franklin's maxim, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Now, I won't promise that the multiple is a 1 to 16 multiple, but the economics need to work, that if you invest in $1 of prevention today, you will save many more dollars around crisis intervention tomorrow. And this is very much the underlying mechanism for the social impact bond, that early investment in prevention will drive inefficiency out of the system and allow for multiple parties to benefit under the instrument. And what is the underlying asset underneath the social impact bond? Is that these nonprofit providers deliver results to the vulnerable populations. It's only when they deliver results and make sure that the right preventative programs are being implemented do we then see this positive cycle of financial and social value return to all the stakeholders. First, as I mentioned, the economics need to be there, that the ultimate value created to society has to be far greater than the cost of the intervention itself. Second, we need to have proven models out there, and we also need to have capable service providers who can deploy this capital and actually implement the work. Finally, the issues around measurability are not to be undertaken lightly. You need to be able to define a target population, track these people over time, and measure their success. And we also need to measure success in a way that is robust, against a set of counterfactuals, if you will, that you can attribute success to this particular program and not just noise in the market. We need to do all of this within a reasonable time horizons that is acceptable to investors. And finally, the most important thing that we do is that we want to make sure that no harm is being done. As we emerge from the great financial crisis, I can't imagine a more opportune time to rethink the role of finance and the role of capital markets in enabling social progress. But we must also keep in mind that finance is purely a means to an end. And the end is very much about achieving social good and helping those who are more vulnerable than we.